4 more days. That is how much time is left between today, which is October 30th, 2020, and Election Day, which is November 3rd, 2020. That is how much time is left until voting finally ends for the 2020 presidential election, which has Donald Trump and Joe Biden competing against each other to see who will become president on January 20th, 2021. So, in this video, I would like to talk about all the different possibilities for how this election can play through on a state by state basis. This isn't really my definitive prediction on how this election will play through and what the final result will be. I already made that video a few days ago, and in that video that I made a few days ago, I said that unless something big happened between now and election day, that I wouldn't be changing that prediction, and that the prediction that I made in that video would be my final one. And as of now, nothing big enough has happened that warrants me changing any of the predictions that I made in that video. So the prediction that I made in that video stands for now. And in that video, I gave Joe Biden 319 electoral votes, Donald Trump 219 electoral votes. If you want to see my state by state rundown on how I judged each state and how I thought each state would vote, then you can watch that video and then come back to this video. But in this video, I would basically be talking about the worst case scenario for Biden and the worst case scenario for Trump, and what is the likely range of electoral college votes for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So let's begin with that now. I will start off by shading in all the states where I am almost 100% sure that they will vote for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So these are all the states that are safe for either candidate. These are all the states where the polls show one candidate ahead of another by at least 10 percentage points. So they're not even remotely swing states, basically. So these include all these northeastern states such as Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., as well as New York, Illinois, the West Coast such as Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii. That brings Democrats to 182. These are all the completely safe states, but there's three more states I'd like to shade in, and these are Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico. And the thing about these three states is that in a normal election year, if there was no COVID-19 pandemic, if Donald Trump hadn't had such a low approval rating in the past several months, I feel like Joe Biden wouldn't have such an easy time winning these three states. I feel like Donald Trump would actually have a chance of winning either Virginia, Colorado, or New Mexico if there was no pandemic going on. But because of the fact that a pandemic has been going on for the last 8 to 9 months, and a lot of people are judging Trump negatively because of that, I think Donald Trump has basically no chance of winning either New Mexico, Colorado, or Virginia. So I think all those states are basically guaranteed to vote for Biden at this point. But in a normal election year, I think that Donald Trump would have had a chance of winning any of those three states. So those are all the safe Democratic states. Let's go to the safe Republican states now. These include some of the western states such as Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah, as well as the Dakotas, both north and south, all of Nebraska except the 2nd Congressional District, as well as Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, and Missouri, and Alaska. So these are all the states where I am almost 100% sure they will vote for either Donald Trump or for Joe Biden. All the blue states I'm almost 100% sure will vote for Biden. All the red states I'm near certain they'll vote for Trump. You'll see here, the Democrats, which in this case is Joe Biden, have many more electoral votes than Donald Trump. The reason why this is the case is because 1, Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico, which would normally not be so safe for Democrats, now is safe. And 2, states that normally would be safe for Republicans, such as Texas and Georgia, now aren't so safe because of Donald Trump's relatively low approval rating as of now. See, if I shade in Texas and Georgia, but not Colorado, New Mexico, or Virginia, things are basically tied up here, 179 to 182. But when you shade in Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia, but not Texas or Georgia, Democrats have a huge advantage here. This just shows that Democrats have a much easier time winning this election than Republicans do. Democrats are already off to a good start just with all the safe states, and they don't need too much more to win this election. And that is why 538.com currently gives Biden a 90% chance of winning this election compared to Trump's 10%. But starting from here, we're going to go through all the different possibilities, and we're going to go through Biden's worst case scenario and Trump's worst case scenario. We'll start off with Trump's worst case scenario, or sorry, Biden's worst case scenario, my bad. So Trump's best case scenario or Biden's worst case scenario. Even in Trump's best case scenario, he doesn't even win by that much, and we'll talk about why that is. So in his best case scenario, he would definitely win Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. And then he would also win Arizona and Ohio and Iowa. So that brings Trump to 258. And then in his best case scenario, he would also win Nevada, all of the Rust Belt, and New Hampshire, and also Nebraska's 2nd district, Maine's 2nd district, but not Maine's 1st district. And I guess in his best case scenario, he would win Maine's as a whole. That's not even that much of a landslide. 328 votes for the Republican candidate, which here is Donald Trump. That's not even that much. That's not even that close to being a landslide. I would say a landslide would be at least 350 electoral votes. It's not even really a landslide. And this is his absolute best case scenario. That includes him winning the entire Rust Belt and Nevada and New Hampshire and Maine, which at this point has less than, I would say, a 0.5% chance of happening. More realistically, what's going to happen is Biden will win Nevada, New Hampshire, Maine, and at least two of the Rust Belt states, if not all four. So Minnesota, Michigan, and then Arizona, and then maybe one more of these Rust Belt states. Probably both, to be honest. Joe Biden has a much better chance than Donald Trump of winning the Rust Belt overall. So if you just shade in the Rust Belt states in Arizona, then Joe Biden's already up to 289. And then the 2nd congressional district actually has a better chance of voting for Joe Biden in this election. So that brings Joe Biden to 290. Then if you add in Florida and North Carolina to the mix, which actually has a good chance of voting for Biden, better chance than voting for Trump, that brings Biden to 334. Then if you add the states that are less safe for Biden, that are leaning towards Trump by a bit, which include Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, now Biden's at 374. And then Texas. Texas, the state that hasn't voted for a Republican since 1970. Sorry, it hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1976. The last time Texas was a blue state was in 1976 when it voted for Jimmy Carter. Ever since then, for the past 44 years, Texas has been a consistently red state ever since Reagan won in a landslide victory in 1980 and 84. Texas has stayed red ever since. So if Texas were to somehow break the 44-year trend and vote blue this election, that would be 412 electoral votes for Biden. By the way, Texas has slowly shifted more and more towards the left, more and more towards the Democrats in the past couple decades. So there's a really good chance that by the end of the decade, it could be more of a liberal state than a conservative state, and that by the end of this decade, it could be voting for Democratic leaders instead of Republican leaders. But as of now, that is not likely. It's probably going to be a red state in this presidential election still. But if Joe Biden wins Texas, not Oklahoma, just Texas, that would bring his electoral college count to 412. And I guess if you add Maine's 2nd district here, that would bring him to 413, which is his absolute best case scenario for this presidential election. So Biden's absolute best case scenario is 413. Trump's best case scenario is 326. So just from that, you can see that Biden's best case scenario is much better than Trump's best case scenario. Biden's best case scenario is an absolute landslide, 413 votes. That's almost a 300-point margin in the electoral college between Trump and Biden. But then Trump's best case scenario is just over 300, which is not even that much, not even that close to a landslide. That is only beating Biden by around 100 electoral votes, if even that. So Biden does have a much, much better chance of winning this presidential election. If I were to say what the most likely range is for the electoral college votes, I would say the most likely outcome is that Biden gets anywhere from 290 electoral votes to 350 electoral votes. So the worst case scenario that's realistic for Biden is that he loses Texas, Ohio, Iowa, and Georgia, and North Carolina, and Florida, but he still wins everything else here besides Maine 2nd. Then he would have 290 electoral votes. But then his upper bound, which is realistic, would be also winning North Carolina, Florida, and then, yeah, Nebraska 2nd, and then at least one of these 3 states, either Texas, Iowa, or Ohio. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to say Ohio, and that brings Biden to 352, or Georgia. I forgot to mention that. He could also win Georgia. So one of those 4 states, either Texas, Ohio, Iowa, or Georgia, one of those 4 states plus everything else that's currently shaded in blue, that would be Biden's best case scenario. So best case scenario that's realistic, by the way. So a realistic range for Biden in terms of the electoral college votes is anywhere from 290 to 350, but it is possible he gets more than 290, more than 350 or less than 290, but I wouldn't count on it. In all likelihood, Biden will win this presidential election, but we just have to see. This isn't a definitive prediction. I cannot predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen. You just have to watch on election night.